We as journalists should become influencers. And to do so, we need to be more humane and we need to show our faces.
Welcome to Beyond the Scoop, a podcast from Harriman Magazine at Columbia University's Harriman Institute. I'm Masha Udensiva-Brenner, and the voice you just heard was Latvian journalist Inga Springe.
I'm co-founder of the Baltic Center of Investigative Journalism, Re Baltica.
Re Baltica is an investigative nonprofit media outlet based in Latvia. It's in the vein of U.S. investigative outlet ProPublica, but focused on issues in the Baltic countries that were once part of the Soviet Union, Latvia and its neighboring Estonia and Lithuania. In the latest issue of Harriman Magazine, Inga wrote about the rise and fall of Diena, a newspaper founded in Latvia in 1990, a year before the country gained its independence from the Soviet Union. Diena, which means day, was modeled after Western media. And in her story for the magazine, Inga wrote about the role the paper played in facilitating Latvia's admission into NATO and the European Union.
The thing was, we want to be part of NATO and we want to be part of European Union because it meant security.
Entry into those international bodies was far from automatic, though. Candidates are evaluated on their commitment to democratic concepts like rule of law, respecting human rights, and fighting government corruption. Diena, where Inga would end up working in the early 2000s, was particularly adept at investigating and exposing corruption. And there was plenty to expose, especially among Latvia's new breed of oligarchs. Diena did a great job uncovering corruption, until, in 2009, the paper was sold in a murky deal that apparently put it in the hands of the very same oligarchs whose corrupt practices Diena had been exposing in its reporting. That story is told in Inga's Harriman Magazine piece. When I spoke with her, I asked her to recall the initial period of independence in the early 1990s, when Latvians were celebrating their new freedom, while Russia campaigned to keep Latvia within its imperial orbit.
Everything seemed possible. We didn't calculate, can we achieve European Union? Can we be in the NATO? It just didn't seem so important. We just wanted to be there and we are doing everything, whatever time it will take. So the first rush was to dismantle everything.
To dismantle Soviet institutions.
So to make it, in case something happens, to be harder to get back.
In other words, if those Soviet institutions were abolished, it would be more difficult for Russia to regain a foothold in Latvia.
And that's why it was so important to become again part of Europe.
Before the Soviet takeover of the Baltics during World War II,
we were like Western countries. We were European countries. We were independent countries.
But as much as the newly independent Baltics felt like they belonged in Europe, not all the countries of Western Europe saw it that way, says Inga.
There was kind of this suspicious and not so big trust.
Inga says that the suspicion continued even after the Baltic countries joined the European Union in 2004, 13 years after independence.
This big brother attitude. All these foreign experts from different international organizations where we wanted to join, they came and taught us, you need to do this.
The foreign experts could sound like scolds, but they were also pushing for needed reforms in Latvia.
And from one side, it was very good, because by trying to get and be part of these main international institutions, Latvia had to improve. We had to make more transparent. We had to reduce corruption, which was very high, and still it's very high. We had to think more about freedom of media.
And while the European Union's pressure was good motivation for Latvia to clean up the systems that weren't working, there were also drawbacks to reuniting with the rest of the continent.
Latvians always felt that you don't understand our history, especially misunderstanding about Russian speakers in the Baltics.
The biggest example of not understanding that history, says Inga, was on the question of who deserved citizenship in Latvia. Western leaders tried to pressure Latvians into automatically giving citizenship and the right to vote to the Russian speakers living in Latvia when the Soviet Union dissolved. That was 30% of the population.
When you come and you say that Russian speakers are minority and we should treat them like other minorities in Europe, we always said, no, you don't understand, it's different.
Many of the Russian speakers living in Soviet Latvia never learned to speak Latvian, and after independence, they still didn't want to learn the country's language. For news and for entertainment, they watched Russian state television.
And of course, Russia was doing everything to keep all these people consuming Russian media.
Russian media, which was becoming as propagandistic as media in the old Soviet Union.
I still remember from my childhood watching all these Soviet movies that bad Germans and good Russian Soviet soldiers who were helping animals and people and small children.
Latvians feared these people would buy the propaganda about Russia and that they would vote for Russian-sponsored political parties. Because of this, they didn't want to grant Russian speakers Latvian citizenship unless they showed more commitment and understanding about the country where they were living.
You had to pass language exam and know history, and there was always this pressure that we have to make it more like soft and that we need to almost like automatically give citizenship to these people.
Latvia was asking potential citizens to take language and history exams to be approved for citizenship, the way candidates for citizenship have to do in the United States. But Western Europeans felt that Latvians should be less demanding of those Russian speakers who were already living in Latvia when the Soviet Union collapsed. They didn't understand the reasons behind these requirements, says Inga.
It was always about these human rights, and you do treat these people equally, you need to give them more rights, they're not like threat to you.
But Latvians did see Russian speakers as a threat, and while neighboring Estonia did give its Russian-speaking population some rights, like allowing non-citizens to vote in municipal elections, Latvia did not. Latvia also resisted a push to make Russian an official language.
This was when all media took a stand. Everyone took a stand. It's not going to happen. It's a threat to local Latvian identity and nationalism.
So it never did become the second recognized language?
No.
Diena was one of the prominent voices opposing the proposal to make Russian an official language. For nearly 2 decades, the paper spoke out firmly in support of protecting Latvian identity and of uniting with Europe. It was a popular editorial stance with the employees, who were Diena's initial owners, and the editorial policy continued when the paper was bought by a Swedish media group called Bonnier. In those early years, an oligarch class was rising in Latvia, as it was across the entire region of former Soviet republics.
Latvia was the main money laundering hub for all these former Soviet oligarchs, starting from Russia, including Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan. We had a huge, strong influence from Russia.
Can you talk about Diena and the fate that this flourishing independent newspaper met in the face of oligarchs?
Yeah, but as we discussed from the beginning of the 90s, Diena was all the time for these Western values, and we need to become part of international society.
These values included exposing the corruption of oligarchs who were doing business in Latvia, tracing ownership of the offshore companies they were using, investigating various crimes. But oligarchs don't like to be investigated. And the Latvian oligarchs, some of whom own their own newspaper, started using that paper to tarnish Diena's reputation. They falsely accused Diena of being in the pockets of U.S. billionaires like the philanthropist George Soros. Readers didn't know what to believe, says Inga, and with these contradictory messages coming from the media, readers started losing their faith in the press altogether.
For regular people, it became like too nuanced, and then it all led to a total financial crisis, both internationally in 2008, 9, 10, around that time. And by coincidence, it was also going down time for a printed press, because internet was flourishing and press also was like really struggling.
A confluence of external factors, the rise of the internet, the global financial crisis, made it very difficult for Diena to survive. And then the Swedish Bonnier Group, the media company that owned the majority of Diena's shares, sold the paper.
And they sold it without saying the management, like editor-in-chief or like management of Diena, which was like really betrayal.
Diena's editorial team only found out when a stranger showed up and told them that the paper had been sold. But he wouldn't tell them who the new owner was.
When this young guy showed up, he couldn't explain who are the owners. He was mumbling something about some mystical royal family from UK, strange companies you couldn't see like ultimate beneficial owners. And even now, more than 10 years later, the oligarchs themselves, they denied that they own Diena.
It was only after an investigation by Latvia's anti-corruption bureau secretly recorded conversations between an oligarch and his associates that there was evidence pointing toward the identity of Diena's new owner. The conversation focused on a plan to get revenge on Diena for its aggressive investigative reporting. Inga was working at Diena when the paper was sold, but not long after, she started her own investigative media outlet, Baltica. And can you talk about Baltica a bit? When did you become involved, and what is the mission of the outlet?
So Diena was bought by unknown people, which we later learned were oligarchs. And I, at that time, by coincidence, I got a scholarship to study for a year in the United States at University of Maryland. And this is where the idea about Baltica was born.
While Inga was in the U.S., she was also in conversation with a former Latvian colleague. The inspiration Inga found from the media she saw here led her and her colleague to envision the framework for Baltica. The outlet has two main lines of focus.
One are the locals, where we cover like social issues, domestic violence, and internationally we've always been like Russia influence methods and money laundering.
Investigations into Russian influence operations are particularly salient for readers in the Baltics as they watch news of Russia's war on Ukraine.
There is threats that we will be next after Ukraine, especially if Ukraine will not win, and local people are really, really worried. And our investigations, unfortunately, shows the same, that there is a big threat that Russia will occupy Baltic countries.
And how is society trending in terms of feelings about the war?
Those who think rationally, and like Latvians, are really worried. There is even like this recent opinion poll which shows that, I don't remember now, 15% is ready to leave the country.
Then there are the Russian-speaking residents of Latvia who watch Russian television and consume other forms of Russian propaganda.
They believe that it's fear-mongering. Russia would never occupy Baltics, or if Russian tanks will arrive, we will greet them with flowers.
This tension has created an atmosphere of deep distrust, especially toward the media, and Inga believes that journalists should change their tactics in order to regain societal trust, that they should connect more with their audience.
We as journalists should become influencers, and to do so, we need to be more humane, and we need to show our faces.
Last year, Baltica did just this by putting on a live storytelling event where journalists used multimedia to give a behind-the-scenes window into their reporting. The live show revolved around the journalist's experience, reporting a 4-episode documentary series exploring the split in Latvian society between those Latvians who thought critically about Russia and those who became Russian propagandists in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
We made these journalistic stories where we told about our feelings while working on this movie. We told these stories from the stage together with actors. Actors came in when we retold like some episodes with politicians or like our parents, how we were talking about it.
The journalists performed at the Chekhov Drama Theater in Riga.
And we sold out, now I think 400 or 500 seats. People stood up and they applauded for several minutes. And I was almost like crying. I couldn't hold my tears. And when I realized whatever the purpose was, and you could say we didn't reach many people, it was just like 500 people. But seeing physically these people, I could see that there are people who need us. And they were applauding to us. It was emotionally so strong and important.
Inga sees this sort of direct engagement as the way to forge a path forward within the sea of mistrust and disinformation that dominates the modern-day media environment. Because when journalists become real people to their readership, it's much easier to trust them, she says.
We need to learn from influencers, content creators, show our faces, and tell our investigations as stories.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Scoop, a podcast from Harriman Magazine at Columbia University's Harriman Institute. I'm Masha Udensiva-Brenner. This episode was written and produced by me and edited by Ann Cooper. This is the last episode of Beyond the Scoop for this season. We look forward to connecting again in early 2026 when the next issue of Harriman Magazine is published.